If someone had told me 10 years ago, when I was a gangly teenager with a hopeless crush on my best friend, that I would one day find my home in his father's arms, I would have laughed. Or maybe I would have just shrunk into myself, the way I always did, the idea too strange, too impossible to even comprehend. Life, I've learned, doesn't move in straight lines. It sputters and stalls, it breaks down on the side of the road, and sometimes the person who shows up with the tools to fix it is the last one you ever expected. My life was a carefully curated collection of quiet moments. It was the smell of old paper and dust motes dancing in the slivers of sun at the library where I worked. It was the specific weight of my favorite mug, filled with tea that was always a little too strong, held between my palms on a quiet Tuesday night. It was a fortress of solitude, built brick by brick with routine and emotional distance. I lived alone. I worked alone, mostly cataloging archives in a basement office that other people called the dungeon. I liked it there. The silence was a comfortable blanket. My world was small, and I had made it that way on purpose. It was safer. Fewer variables, fewer chances for the kind of hurt that leaves you feeling hollowed out. A bell rung, so heart cracks. Mark was the one exception, the one variable I allowed. My best friend since we were kids, clumsy and loud and full of a life that I could only ever watch from the sidelines. For years, my affection for him was a secret ache in my chest, a constant, low-grade fever I learned to live with. He was the sun, and I was just a pale satellite caught in his orbit. And then there was his father, Cole. Cole was not a part of my quiet world. He was a figure from the periphery, a man carved from granite and quiet disapproval. Or so I had always thought. In all the years I'd spent at Mark's house, sleeping over, raiding the fridge, Cole was a presence more than a person. A shadow in the garage, the low rumble of his voice through a wall, the scent of motor oil and sawdust that clung to the downstairs hallway. He was big, not just tall but broad, with hands that looked like they could tear a phone book in half. Calloused, stained, always busy. While Mark was all bright, easy smiles, Cole was a locked door. I was terrified of him. He had a way of looking at you, a direct, unblinking gaze that felt like an assessment. A judgment. I always felt like I came up short. Too skinny, too quiet, too something. The friend his son kept around for reasons he couldn't quite fathom. So I kept my distance. A polite hello, Mr. Henderson, was the most I ever managed, my voice always a little too high, my eyes fixed on the floor. He would give a short nod in return, a grunt that was neither welcoming nor dismissive, and then he would be gone, back to the sanctuary of his garage. The distance between us was a chasm. He was Mark's father. He was a man's man, the archetype of everything I was not. He was, in my mind, a monolith of impenetrable masculinity, and I was a bundle of nerves and unspoken feelings, living in a different universe entirely. My crush on Mark had created a strange, invisible barrier around his whole family. I was always performing, always hiding a fundamental part of myself. It made my interactions with his parents, especially his stoic father, feel like navigating a minefield. One wrong step, one look held too long at his son, and the whole thing would blow up. So I existed in the margins of their family life, a ghost at the dinner table. And Cole remained a mystery, a mountain I had no desire to climb. Then my truck died. It wasn't a quiet death. It was a violent, shuddering affair on the shoulder of the highway, complete with a plume of pathetic, gray smoke. My old Ford, my one piece of reliable machinery, my symbol of self-sufficiency, gave a final, wheezing gasp and fell silent. I was stranded, not just physically but emotionally. My routine was shattered. My carefully constructed solitude was breached by the unwelcome reality of tow trucks and repair bills I couldn't afford. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the base of my neck. I called Mark because that's what I always did. He was living 3 states away now, but he was still my first call in a crisis. The engine just stopped, I said, my voice thin against the whoosh of passing cars. Leo, that truck is older than we are. I'm surprised it lasted this long. He laughed, and for a second, I hated his easygoing nature. Listen, don't take it to some chain. They'll rip you off. You have to take it to my dad, the world tilted. A sick, anxious feeling flooded my stomach, a swarm of angry bees. Oh no, I couldn't. I can't bother him. Bother him? It's his job, you idiot. He owns a garage. En son naissance. Except, the son bailed to become a graphic designer, another easy laugh. Seriously, get it towed there. I'll call him and let him know you're coming. He'll take care of you. He'll take care of you. The words echoed in my head, laced with a dread so profound it was almost comical. There was no arguing. Mark was already making plans, his competence a tidal wave that swept my protests away, and so I was forced into it. My broken-down truck, a heap of metal and failure, was dragged into the one place I never, ever wanted to be, Cole Henderson's garage. His space. His world. The tow truck driver dropped it in the side lot, and I walked toward the open bay doors like a man walking to his own execution. The air changed immediately. The scent of summer asphalt gave way to something richer, deeper. The metallic tang of oil, the sharp smell of gasoline, the faint, dusty scent of old rubber. It smelled like him. He was under the hood of a car, a single work light illuminating the intricate chaos of the engine. His back was to me, broad shoulders, stretching the fabric of a faded navy blue work shirt. The muscles in his back shifted as he worked, a quiet display of contained strength. I cleared my throat. A pathetic little sound. He didn't turn around. Mark called. His voice was a low rumble, seeming to come from the concrete floor itself. Said your truck gave up the ghost. Yeah, it did. My voice was a squeak. He finally straightened up, wiping a greasy hand on an even greasier rag. He turned, and that gaze, the one I'd always feared, landed on me. It was just as direct, just as assessing as I remembered. But this time, I couldn't just look away and mumble a greeting. I was trapped. Pop the hood, he said. It wasn't a question. I did as I was told, my hands fumbling with the latch. He walked over, his heavy work boots loud on the concrete. He stood beside me, so close I could feel a strange heat radiating from him. He leaned over the engine bay, and I found myself watching him instead of the dead machine. This close, he was different. The years I'd only seen from a distance were etched around his eyes, faint silver lines in the sun-creased skin. There was gray dusting his temples, more than I remembered. A small, white scar cut through one of his eyebrows, a detail I'd never noticed before. He looked tired, not just stern, but weary, the kind of deep-seated exhaustion that comes from years of physical labor and long days. He poked and prodded, his large hands surprisingly deft as they moved through the maze of wires and hoses. He had a focus that was absolute. The world outside the circle of my truck's engine bay seemed to cease to exist for him. Hold this, he grunted, shoving a small, grimy flashlight into my hand. I took it, my fingers clumsy. No, not like that. Emmett here. He reached out, not looking at me, and adjusted my hand. His fingers wrapped around mine. It was nothing. It was everything. His hand was rough, the calluses like worn leather against my smooth, soft skin. The back of his knuckles, stained with grease, brushed against my palm. A jolt, sharp and clean as a static shock, shot up my arm. Heat flooded my face. My heart, that frantic, trapped bird, started beating a panicked rhythm against my ribs. It was over in a second. He let go, his attention already back on a corroded battery terminal. But the ghost of his touch remained. A brand, a searing imprint on my skin. I stood there, holding the flashlight with a trembling hand, my entire being screaming. It meant nothing, I told myself, a frantic internal chant. He was just positioning the light. It's not real. Stop it. But it was too late. The carefully constructed wall between us, the one I'd maintained for a decade, had a crack in it. A tiny fissure caused by the accidental brush of a hand. And I could feel the foundation starting to crumble. He worked in a focused silence that I was too terrified to break. I just stood there, my arm aching from holding the light, my mind a whirlwind of panic and a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Finally, he straightened up again, letting out a long sigh. He wiped his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a dark smudge. Well, it's not the battery. I just nodded, unable to form words. Alternator shot. Maybe more. I'll have to get on the lift to know, for sure. He looked at me, then really looked, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You look like you're about to pass out, kid. I'm fine." I lied, the words catching in my throat. Right, the corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. It was so unexpected, it was like seeing the sun rise in the west. "It's going to take me a few days to get the parts in, best case. How are you getting around?" The practical question brought me crashing back to earth. "Oh, I'll take the bus. Or walk." He grunted, a sound of disapproval. He looked over at an older, slightly beat-up sedan parked in the corner. "That was my wife's car. Just sits here now. You can use it." My mind went blank. "What? No, I can't. That's too. It's a car, Leo. It's meant to be driven." He said my name. He never said my name before. It sounded different in his low voice. Solid. Real. "Either that, or I drive you to and from that library dungeon of yours." Your choice, the idea of being in a car with him every morning and every evening, trapped in that small space, was both terrifying and something else. Something I refused to name. "I'll take the car," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He fished a set of keys from a hook on the wall and tossed them to me. My reflexes were, for once, not terrible. I caught them. They felt heavy in my palm. Heavy with a kindness I hadn't expected, a responsibility I didn't want. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer just the awkward kid. I was someone he was helping, someone he was caring for. It was a change so monumental it left me dizzy. Over the next few days, a new, surreal routine began. I drove his late wife's car, a vehicle that felt haunted by a life I knew nothing about. It smelled faintly of old perfume and peppermints. Each morning, I dropped the keys through the mail slot of the garage before work, and each evening, I'd pick them up from under a designated floor mat. We barely spoke. I'd see him sometimes, a glimpse of him working as I drove away. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was charged with the memory of his touch, with the unexpectedness of his offer. On the third day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Need you to come by the garage after work. Need your help with something." No name, but I knew who it was. My stomach twisted itself into a pretzel. "Need your help." The words were absurd. What help could I possibly offer him? I knew less than nothing about cars. I walked into the garage that evening with a sense of impending doom. He had my truck on the lift, its underbelly exposed like a patient on an operating table. "I need a smaller pair of hands," he said without preamble, pointing at a tight space near the transmission. "I can't reach this bolt. You might be able to." He wanted me to touch the truck. My truck, but also his project. He was inviting me into his work, into his world. He explained what to do, his voice patient, his instructions simple and clear. I lay on a wheeled creeper, the cold metal a shock through my thin shirt, and rolled myself under the massive vehicle. It was a strange, disorienting world down there. A forest of metal and grime. Cole's face appeared upside down beside me, his head and shoulders under the truck with me. We were inches apart. I could see the stubble on his jaw, the way his brow furrowed in concentration. I could smell the coffee on his breath. The space felt impossibly small, charged with a proximity that made my skin prickle. "Right there," he said, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my chest. "Just need you to hold the wrench on the nut while I turn the bolt from up top." I reached up, my arm awkward, my fingers fumbling for the cold metal of the wrench he'd given me. I found the nut, my hand wedged into the tight space. "Got it?" he asked. "I think so." He disappeared for a moment, and then I heard the click of his own ratchet from above. The wrench in my hand jumped as he applied pressure. "Hold it steady." I gripped it tighter, my knuckles pressed against a greasy engine block. My muscles strained. It was surprisingly difficult. After a moment, the bolt gave way with a loud crack. "All right, got it," his voice called out. I relaxed, my arm aching. I started to pull my hand out, but it was stuck. The angle was wrong. Panic, sharp and immediate, seized me. "I'm stuck," I said, my voice tight. His face reappeared beside me, concern replacing his focused expression. "Don't panic. Just relax your hand." I tried. But the more I thought about it, the more my muscles tensed. My heart was hammering. It was stupid. I was trapped. In a truck. In front of him. Humiliation burned in my gut. Okay, easy, he said, his voice calm and steady. He slid closer, his shoulder pressing against mine. He reached up with one hand, his fingers gently probing the space around my trapped wrist. Just breathe, Leo. His touch was clinical, impersonal, but my body didn't care. The contact sent another wildfire through my veins. He maneuvered my hand, his thumb pressing into my palm in a way that was both guiding and strangely intimate. Turn your wrist this way. Slowly, I followed his instruction, and with a slight scrape, my hand came free. I pulled my arm back and held it to my chest, my knuckles scraped and covered in grease. I felt like a complete idiot. Cole rolled out from under the truck and stood up. I followed, avoiding his eyes, my face burning with shame. Thanks, I mumbled. Sorry. Nothing to be sorry for. Happens. He gestured to a sink in the corner I hadn't noticed before. Go wash up. There's a first aid kit under the sink if you need it. He turned back to the truck, dismissing me, but it didn't feel like a rejection. It felt like grace. He was giving me a moment to collect myself. I washed my hands, the industrial-strength soap stripping the grease away. There was a long, shallow scrape across my knuckles, angry and red. I found the kit and clumsily tried to wrap a bandage around my own hand. A shadow fell over me. Cole was standing there, holding a clean rag. He took the bandage from my fumbling fingers. Here, he took my hand in his. His grip was surprisingly gentle. He carefully cleaned the scrape with an antiseptic wipe, his touch firm and sure. The sting of the alcohol was nothing compared to the storm raging inside me. He held my hand, turning it over in his much larger one, inspecting the damage. His thumb rested on my pulse point, and I was sure he could feel the frantic, terrified beat of my heart. He wrapped the bandage with an efficiency that was mesmerizing. His head was bent, his focus entirely on my hand. I could do nothing but stare at the top of his head, at the strands of silver woven into his dark hair. The world narrowed to this single point of contact, his rough, warm hands tending to my stupid, clumsy one. When he was done, he didn't let go immediately. He held my hand for a moment longer, his thumb stroking softly over the back of my wrist. It was a deliberate, conscious movement. It was not accidental. It was not clinical. My breath caught in my chest. I looked up and met his eyes. The assessment was gone. The sternness was gone. In its place was something I couldn't name. Something questioning and deep and shockingly vulnerable. The air in the garage grew thick, heavy. The sounds of the street outside faded away. It was a question. His gaze, his touch, it was all a question. And I had no idea how to answer. He finally released my hand, the absence of his touch a sudden cold shock. He cleared his throat and took a step back, breaking the spell. The world rushed back in. The main part one ordered was wrong, he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. They're sending a new one, but it's not going to be here until tomorrow afternoon. Looks like we're working late. He said it like a fact, a simple statement of logistics. But it felt like something else entirely. A declaration, an appointment. And there's a storm rolling in, he added, glancing towards the open bay doors, where the sky was turning a bruised purple. Might get stuck here for a while. The next evening, I returned to the garage, feeling like I was walking into a different dimension. The air was thick and humid, pregnant with a coming storm. The sky was a dark, churning ceiling of gray clouds. I felt a strange sense of inevitability, as if I were a pawn being moved across a board by an unseen hand. Cole was already there, a new, clean part sitting on his workbench like a trophy. He acknowledged me with a nod, his expression unreadable. The easy, if silent, rhythm we'd found the day before was gone. In its place was a taut wire of tension, stretched thin between us. We worked. He gave me small tasks, simple things I couldn't mess up, handing him tools, holding the light again, though this time our hands never touched. The silence was absolute, broken only by the clink of metal on metal and the rising howl of the wind outside. Then the rain started. Not a gentle shower, but a deluge. A wall of water that hit the metal roof of the garage with a deafening roar. It was as if the world outside had been completely erased, leaving only this small island of light and machinery. Cole finished the last bolt and lowered the truck from the lift. He started the engine. It roared to life, a steady, healthy rumble that filled the space. It was fixed. My escape route was back. He cut the engine, and the silence that followed was deeper, more profound than before. Only the drumming of the rain on the roof remained. "It's done," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you," I said, my own voice sounding small. "I don't know how to thank you. No thanks necessary." He walked over to the workbench and started wiping his hands on a rag, his back to me. "You're not going anywhere in this, though. Wait for it to let up." We were trapped, just as he'd predicted. He opened a small, battered refrigerator in the corner and pulled out 2 beers, holding one out to me. I took it. The bottle was cold and slick in my nervous hand. He leaned against the workbench, taking a slow drink from his bottle. I stood awkwardly in the middle of the floor, not knowing what to do or where to put myself. The space felt charged, every empty inch filled with unspoken things. "Mark tells me you're writing a book," he said, his voice startlingly casual. I blinked. "Oh, yeah. Trying to about what?" The question was so simple, so normal, but coming from him, it felt revolutionary. He was asking about my life, my inner world. It's historical fiction, about cartographers in the 16th century. I waited for the grunt, the dismissal. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "Mapping the world, yeah. Trying to make sense of things. Put borders on the unknown." The words came out before I could stop them. He was quiet for a long moment, looking down at the beer bottle in his hands. The rain hammered down. "I get that," he said, so softly I almost didn't hear him. "My wife, Sarah, she used to say this garage was my map. Everything had its place. Every problem had a solution, a part you could replace." Not like people, my heart stuttered. He had never spoken of her. Not to me. Not to anyone, as far as I knew. Mark had told me she left them years ago, and that was all. "It must be lonely," I said, the words bold and reckless. "Out here." He looked up at me then, and the mask was gone. The stern mechanic, the intimidating father, it all fell away. In his eyes, I saw a loneliness so vast and deep it mirrored my own. It was a shocking, painful recognition. "Mark's gone," he said, his voice raw. "He's happy. That's good. But the end sun on the sign is just paint now. This place is too quiet." He took another drink of his beer. "Gets bigger every year, this garage. And I get smaller." The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying. He had shown me his vulnerability, a piece of his map's unknown territory. The reciprocity was a physical weight, a demand. It was my turn. "I know what you mean," I whispered. About the quiet, I thought of my small apartment, the silence I had once cultivated as a shield, which had long since become a cage. I spent so many years waiting for something, for someone. I built my whole life around a person who didn't even know they were the center of my map. And when they moved away, I realized my map was blank. There was nothing there but him. I didn't say Mark's name, but I didn't have to. A flicker of understanding, of something like sadness, crossed Cole's face. He knew. Maybe he'd always known. He set his beer down with a soft click. He pushed off the workbench and took a step toward me. Then another. He stopped in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. The air crackled. The rain on the roof was the only sound in the universe. "We're a couple of fools, then," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. He raised his hand, the one that had been bandaged, and gently, so gently, cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek. It wasn't a shock this time. It was a current, slow and warm, that melted the ice in my veins. "Leo," he whispered, and my name was a prayer. My eyes fluttered shut. "This is a mistake," a voice screamed in the back of my mind. "This is Mark's father. This is impossible." But then his other hand came up to rest on my waist, a steadying, grounding pressure, and all the voices went silent. All that was left was the rain and the scent of oil and the warmth of his hand on my skin. He leaned down slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. His lips met mine. It was not a kiss of frantic passion. It was slow, hesitant. It was a question asked in a language I was only just learning. His lips were chapped, firm, and they tasted faintly of beer and loneliness. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of two quiet worlds colliding in the eye of a storm. I kissed him back, a shy, trembling response that was more honest than anything I had ever said aloud. It was the most terrifying and the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. It was the moment my old map was set on fire, and I didn't care if I was left with only the ashes. The kiss ended as slowly as it began. He rested his forehead against mine, his breath warm on my face. We stood there for a long time, cocooned in the storm, the only two people in the world. I shouldn't have done that, he breathed, his voice ragged. But he didn't move away. His hands were still on me, holding me. Yes, you should have, I whispered back, the bravest words I had ever spoken. He took my hand, the one he had bandaged, and led me out of the main garage, through a side door I hadn't noticed before. It led into a small, sparsely furnished house. His house. We left the world of engines and grease behind and entered a world of quiet domesticity. He led me to his bedroom, and in the dim light, with the rain as our only witness, we mapped the rest of our unknown territory together. I woke to the unfamiliar sliver of dawn cutting through a gap in the curtains. The rain had stopped. The silence that remained was absolute and terrifying. I was alone. The other side of the bed was empty, the sheets cold. Panic, my old, familiar companion, clawed its way up my throat. My clothes were in a neat pile on a chair. Too neat. I dressed in a frantic haste, my fingers fumbling with buttons. Every sound in the small house was amplified. The creak of a floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator. There was no sign of him. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of regret. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness in a storm. He regrets it. He's disgusted. He's gone. The thoughts were a vicious, spiraling torrent. I had crossed a line, a sacred, unspoken boundary. I had slept with my best friend's father. The self-recrimination was a physical sickness churning in my gut. What had I done? I had taken his moment of vulnerability, his confession of loneliness, and I had twisted it into this. An act he was now so ashamed of he couldn't even face me. I crept out of the bedroom and into the small living room. On the kitchen counter, I saw my truck keys. Next to them was a folded piece of paper. My blood ran cold. This was it. The note. The "this was a mistake, let's forget it ever happened" note. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I unfolded it. Coffee is made. Had to open the shop early. Your truck is parked out front. The bill is on the counter. That was it. No emotion. No explanation. Just logistics. Cold, hard, brutal logistics. The bill. He was reducing what had happened between us to a transaction. I fixed your truck. You were a temporary cure for loneliness. Now pay up and get out. The pain was a sharp, physical blow. I felt winded, hollowed out. Of course, this is what I got for stepping out of my quiet, safe world. For wanting something I couldn't have. I couldn't face him. I couldn't drink his coffee. I grabbed my keys, ignored the piece of paper that was my bill, and fled his house like a thief. My truck, my beautiful repaired truck, was indeed parked out front, gleaming in the pale morning light. It looked alien to me now, a monument to my own stupidity. I got in and drove away, my rearview mirror empty. I didn't look back. The silence that followed was a new kind of torture. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of my apartment or the charged silence of the garage. It was an absence, a gaping, echoing void where he had been. My solitude, once a fortress, was now a prison. The quiet rooms of my apartment felt hostile. The books I loved were just paper and ink. Every moment was tainted by the memory of the night before and the brutal, businesslike morning that followed. One day passed. Then two. Nothing. No call. No text. Just a crushing, suffocating silence. I replayed the note in my head 1,000 times. The bill is on the counter. Each time, the words were a fresh stab of humiliation. He was putting a price on it. He was making it clear that our interaction was over, the transaction complete. All that was left was to settle the account. My old anxieties, the ones I had spent a lifetime taming, came back with a vengeance. I was a fool, a naive, pathetic fool who had misread everything. The loneliness in his eyes, the hesitant kiss, the shared vulnerability, I had imagined it all. It was just a man, a storm, and a moment of weakness. And I was the collateral damage. I tried to call Mark, to hear a familiar voice, but I couldn't. What would I say? The secret I was keeping now was 1,000 times heavier than my old, simple crush. It felt like a betrayal. On the evening of the second day, I finally worked up the courage to deal with the last piece of the mess. The bill. I couldn't let it hang over me. I drove to a bank, withdrew the cash, an amount that made my stomach clench, and put in an envelope. I would drive to the garage after it closed, slip it through the mail slot, and that would be the end. A clean break. My life could go back to being small and quiet and safe. The fortress could be rebuilt, this time with higher walls. I drove to the garage late that night. The building was dark, a hulking silhouette against the moonlit sky. I parked across the street, my heart thumping a slow, painful rhythm. This was it, the final, humiliating act of closing the door on my own stupidity. As I got out of my car, holding the envelope in my hand, a light flicked on inside the garage office. My blood froze. He was there. I should have gotten back in my car. I should have driven away. But I was paralyzed, caught in the headlights of my own disaster. The office door opened, and he stepped out. He wasn't in his work clothes. He was wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him. He saw my truck, and then he saw me, a deer in the headlights, standing by my car door. He didn't move for a long moment. He just stood there, staring at me across the empty street. The distance between us felt like miles. Then, he started walking toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get in the truck and disappear. But my feet were rooted to the asphalt. I could only watch as he crossed the street, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet away from me. His face was a mess of emotions I couldn't decipher. Exhaustion, uncertainty, and something else. Something that looked like pain. "Leo," he said, his voice rough. I couldn't speak. I just held up the envelope, a pathetic offering. "The bill," I managed to croak out. He looked at the envelope in my hand, and a pained expression crossed his face. He shook his head. "I'm an idiot," he said, not to me, but to the night sky. He looked back at me, his eyes pleading. "The note. I'm not good with words. I never have been. I woke up, and you were there, sleeping, and I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I haven't woken up next to someone in 10 years. My throat was tight. I still couldn't speak. I didn't know what you were thinking," he continued, his voice low and raw. "If you regretted it. If you were scared. I thought if I just made it normal, business as usual, it would give you an out. A way to just walk away if you wanted to, no questions asked. I was trying to give you space. Not push you away." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "The bill. God, the bill. I wrote it down because that's what I do. It's part of the job. It didn't mean anything. It wasn't about us. He said us. The word hung in the air, a fragile, impossible thing. I've been going out of my mind for 2 days," he confessed, taking another step closer. "Calling you, then hanging up, driving by your apartment, and then losing my nerve. I'm 48 years old, and I'm acting like a scared teenager. Because I haven't felt like that, what I felt with you in that garage, ever. Not even with Sarah. And it terrified me. Tears pricked at my eyes. Tears of relief. So potent they felt like they were dissolving the knot of anxiety in my chest. He wasn't rejecting me. He was just as scared as I was. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "I thought you were disgusted. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. He closed the remaining distance between us and gently took the envelope from my hand, letting it fall to the ground. He took my hands in his. "Leo, I've spent the last 2 days feeling like I finally found a part of my map I didn't even know was missing. Only to lose it again." He looked down our joined hands. "This is new territory for me. It's frightening. I don't know the rules. The age. Mark, there are 100 reasons why this is complicated. But the only thing I'm sure of is that I don't want to go back to that quiet garage by myself. Not anymore." He looked up, his gaze intense and full of a desperate hope. "I don't want you to pay the bill. I want you to come home." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Come home. Not come over. Not come back to my place. Home. He must have seen the shock on my face because he rushed to clarify. I mean to the house. For dinner. Or just to talk. I squeezed his hands, a surge of bravery I didn't know I possessed rising in me. Okay, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Okay. A slow smile spread across his face, a real one this time. It transformed him, erasing the weariness and leaving only a startling, boyish warmth. He didn't let go of my hands. He just stood there, holding them, as if he were afraid I might disappear. After a moment, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single key. It wasn't a car key. It was a house key. He pressed it into my palm and closed my fingers around it. Just in case, he said softly. In case you ever want to come home, and I'm not here to let you in. It was a tangible promise. A symbol. More than an apology. More than an explanation. It was an act of commitment, a key to a world I never thought I'd be invited into. I closed my hand around it, the metal cool against my skin, and knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never need my old fortress again. The first few weeks were a delicate dance, a process of learning the rhythms of shared life. I started spending weekends at his house, the one that was attached to the garage like a vital organ. My small, quiet apartment began to feel less like a home and more like a storage unit for my past self. The first time I made coffee in his kitchen, the act felt monumental. The smell of the coffee grounds mingled with the faint, ever-present scent of motor oil that clung to the house. It was the scent of him, the scent of our new, fragile beginning. We found a quiet intimacy in domestic routines. I would read in an old armchair in the living room while he sat at the kitchen table, sketching out engine diagrams on a notepad. We didn't always need to talk. The silence between us was no longer an anxious void, but a comfortable, shared space. It was the quiet of companionship, not loneliness. One Saturday morning, I woke up in his bed, the sun warm on my face. For a split second, the old panic flared, the morning after anxiety. But then I felt the steady weight of his arm draped over my waist. I heard the sound of his slow, even breathing next to my ear. I turned, and he was there, asleep. His face, so often a mask of stoic concentration, was relaxed and peaceful in the morning light. The anxiety dissolved, replaced by a wave of affection so profound it almost hurt. I was home. This was home. The fear was gone. Telling Mark was the last great mountain to climb. We decided Cole should do it. It was his son, his conversation to have. He made the call one Sunday afternoon, while I sat on the porch, my stomach in knots. I couldn't hear the words, only the low, steady rumble of Cole's voice. It was a long conversation. When he came outside, he looked drained but calm. He sat down next to me on the porch swing. He was quiet for a long time. Cole said, looking out at the yard. Then he said, "Dad, are you happy?" Cole paused, his throat working. I told him I was. Happier than I've been in a very long time. And what did he say? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He said, "Well, Leo's the best person I know. So, try not to screw it up." Cole turned to me, a small, relieved smile on his face. Then he called me an old man and told me he expects a better discount on oil changes from now on. And just like that, the mountain had crumbled into dust. I looked back on the man I was, the quiet, anxious librarian hiding in his fortress of solitude, and I barely recognized him. My life was a book I was afraid to write, its pages blank with the fear of emotional risk. My love for Mark had been a central plot point that went nowhere, a story I told myself for so long I forgot I could write a different one. Cole was the plot twist I never saw coming. The breakdown of my truck was the breakdown of a life I thought I was supposed to live. He didn't just fix my engine. He took the map of my life, the one I thought was hopelessly blank and lost, and he drew a new line on it, a line that led directly to him. He showed me that home isn't a place you build to keep the world out. It's a person you let in. And our story, the one we write together every day in the quiet moments, is my favorite one of all.